Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Brett Kizner. I'm Product Marketing Director here at MEI, and I'll be your host for the next half an hour or so. Today is the second session in our cross-media publishing webinar series, and today we're going to talk about how we can take content that's been authored for print and reuse it in other medium, as well as create content that can go anywhere, and ultimately how you use that and how you configure your workflows up to you. In 2 weeks, on October 24th, we'll be talking about how you can integrate external contributors, writers, authors, freelance designers into your process and into your managed workflow. And then on October 31st, we'll be talking about integrating your publishing and business data. But as I said before, today is all about how you can integrate all of the different channels you're creating into a streamlined and a unified process, which will make it much easier to track and also reduce redundancy in terms of creating content. And let's go ahead and get started. So just very quickly about MEI, we are a commercial software provider for the professional communications industry that crosses magazines, newspapers, books, as well as corporate communications. We've been in business over 20 years, and we're what you'd call a full-service solution provider. In addition to the K4 system, the publishing workflow, we have automation solutions, creative services team that's working with folks trying to create digital editions of their products. We have a full training, integration, and support team, and we also develop add-on technology and custom development for things like the Adobe Digital Publishing Suite. If you're not familiar with K4, K4 is engineered and built by a company called vjoon. It is a task-based workflow system that's database-driven and allows any number of content creators to collaborate on projects. It allows individual pieces of content to be managed and reused in various formats and ultimately output to the different channels that you're creating, whether that's print, web, mobile, iPad, or other devices. So today we're talking all about the complexity of multi-channel publishing. And if we step back from this for a moment and think, well, where have we come from? The last 20 years or so has seen a lot of changes. We, of course, had the introduction of desktop publishing, and that, of course, made it easier for us to produce content for our print channels. And then, of course, the World Wide Web was introduced, and we started creating content for the web. And then folks started to get mobile phones and phones that were capable of producing dynamic content. And so we saw the launch of mobile web versions. Then, of course, the iPhone and now tablet. And of course, I've missed quite a number of steps there, but what we've seen is essentially a multiplication of the number of media and device types that we are ultimately publishing out to. And what we've seen over that process is that very often each of those channels has its own process, its own workflow, and many times its own technology. And that has led to a lot of silos. And so now what we're seeing is a convergence and a desire to simplify and streamline your process so that you don't have print editorial and web editorial. You don't have your print team and your tablet team. You have your content team, and ultimately they can create content and publish it wherever it needs to go. And so through that, how can we solve the problems of authors and editors needing to learn how to use multiple applications? We work with a lot of customers who may have one workflow for their web team and one workflow for their print, and the authors and editors tend to cross over, so they have to think about it when they go to edit content. Well, do I go into my print system, or do I go into my web system? And ultimately, you're seeing less use of dedicated resources, and publishers, quite frankly, are reluctant to add additional channels unless they can do it in a way that isn't going to require more resources and more time. So what are we going to see today? Today we're going to I'm going to show you a variety of automations and a variety of ways in which K4 structures content. We're going to show you something that's probably very straightforward around automated output of InDesign content. For those of you, of course, I think we're all still doing print to some extent or another, though I did see there were some folks in the survey who said they are web first today. How can we take content from print and reuse it for web for those of you that go to print first? And how can we create content packages that ultimately will be turned into XML that can be distributed out? And then what about that web first content? You may today be print first, but more and more of the customers that we're working with are looking to move towards a web first or a channel agnostic publishing strategy where they either might publish their content out to the web and then do a subset of that for their print, or do a redux of that for print, or where some of our customers are is they're just creating content and ultimately they'll decide at the last minute, are we going to put this on the website, are we going to put this into print, or maybe we'll make this a special part of our tablet edition. So we'll talk about that. And then of course folks are using email marketing services, systems like Constant Contact. How can we take content that's managed in K4 and managed as part of its workflow and ultimately build the HTML that you need to go into those email marketing services? So enough with PowerPoint. We'll go straight into the demonstration here. And I'm going to start out with the print first approach. I'm here inside Adobe InDesign. And inside InDesign, I have my query palette. And I can see here that this layout that I see currently has a task to approve that layout. And before I go into that layout, I want to go to the K4 workflow editor. Everything that you've seen today, or you're going to see today, and if you attended our last session, everything you saw then, in terms of automation, in terms of process, is managed by the K4 workflow editor. And we're able, through this graphical workflow interface, to set up the different tasks, which are these yellow boxes, and statuses, these blue boxes, that make up our workflow. And what's nice is we can then determine when things need to begin being done and when they need to be finished by. And ultimately, what metadata do we need to capture, who performs what task, and what automations need to happen. So in my print workflow here for my feature layouts, I can see here I have an automation here to output my layout. Now, if I scroll over and go to my article workflow for my text, you can see I have an automation down in this workflow as well, and that's when the file reaches the ready for web status, and that's the automation that we'll use to publish our story out to our web CMS. And what's nice about this is you can define the steps, who does what, and where automations take place, and the K4 system will know, based on what's been completed, where the file should go to next and automatically spin off those automations. Of course, there are times in your workflow where you need to publish earlier and you may not get through all the steps. And what's nice about that is K4 allows you to set up independent tasks and independent automations. And that ultimately will allow you to have those individual steps that are separate from the overall workflow. So we'll go ahead and go back into InCopy. I'll just close Safari there. Go back into InDesign, excuse me. We can see this approved layout. I'm going to go ahead and open up that InDesign file here. We'll see that open up on my screen here. And my step in the workflow here is to review this and make sure everything's ready for print. And everything looks good for me. If there was a problem, I could very easily put a sticky note on the page and I could comment on it. But we'll save sticky notes for another part of our webinar series. But at this point, if I was ready and everything was complete, I'd go to output this file. And instead of going to the File menu and saying Export and then trying to remember the file naming conventions and the output profile to use and the location of where I'm supposed to save this on an FTP site or on my on my servers, I'm going to let K4 take care of that. So I'm going to go ahead and finish my tasks. K4 will know that right now I'm working on that approval task, and I'm going to say I'm finished with that. And as I talked about when we were looking at the workflow editor, K4 knows that the next step in the workflow is to output this layout. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. The file will be closed on my workstation, and in this case it's going to be sent to the Adobe InDesign server that's powered by the K4 system, and K4 will begin making all of the different outputs that I want. So in my case, I'm going to just show it to you here within this folder, and you'll see more folders starting to appear. The made-to-print process as part of this has gone and created single-page, press-ready PDFs, so you can see here, with my specific profile, my file naming conventions. It's created a set of multimedia content in the form of a Flash and an interactive Adobe Swift file. So you can see here I've got a page turn edition, and certainly if you want to get more interactive beyond this, I recommend going and viewing a recording of the webinar we did last week on the Adobe Digital Publishing Suite integration. I also have another output here of a low-res PDF that I've output as spreads that's cropped to the page. And I have an InDesign archive, which has my IDML file as well as a package of my layout. And in this case, for demonstration purposes, I have this all outputting to one folder, but if your press-ready PDFs needed to go and drop on your printer's FTP site so it could automatically go into Printergy or another pre-flighting system, you could certainly do that. You could have a low-res PDF saved somewhere for the web team to be able to grab, as well as the archives going over to your digital asset management, digital asset library teams for inclusion in the archive. So ultimately, you decide where these files go, what the profiles you use for naming conventions, as well as output type. So the PDF settings, as an example, you ultimately control all of that. But then your end user doesn't have to go and try to remember what the specific profile is for this job and this printer. The K4 system will take care of all of that and then go and output that everything when it's done. So let's move beyond print output. And let's talk about outputting to a web CMS. And I'll just show you here. I've got a page here that this is my web CMS. You can see here I've got a number of stories that have already been published. And I want to take that story that we were just looking at in the print layout, and I want to export that out to the web. And I'm going to do that via Adobe InCopy. You can certainly do this via InDesign as well. But I'm going to go ahead and open up this story. And when we do, what you'll see, I've got my content. Of course, I can see my layout view. Layout view is not very important for me because this, of course, is not how we're going to format the content for the web. But what I do want to point out here in layout view, and you can see it in the other views as well, and I'll point it out in a moment, is that the different frames are tagged with identification of what's headline and what's body, what's a pull quote, sidebar, so on and so forth. And the same is true of the images. And that ultimately allows us to capture the different elements that make up our story so that when we go downstream, we can use the automations to help drive the right content to the right part of our web CMS. And I can help that along by creating a content package. So you'll notice here in the K4 Attachments palette, I can see here my story with my different InCopy text objects, headline, body text, pull quote, sidebar. And I can also see a set of images. And what's nice about this is I can actually attach the images to the story. Of course, both the images and the text are in the layout, but ultimately I can decide by creating a content package which images should be published to the web along with this text. So I'm just going to go and add those 3 images. We'll go ahead and finish our task. And K4 will know that I've been working on 2 tasks. I've been prepping for the web, and that was me creating that content package. And certainly that could be done earlier in the workflow if you decided you wanted to do that. And I also have a task to add web metadata. So I've got additional metadata here that I've configured in the K4 system that I need to capture specifically for my web CMS. And I can decide here, for instance, I want to publish to the website, but I don't want to publish to the iPhone version of my website. So I'll uncheck that. I can go here and set up a web kicker. And this, again, other metadata that we need for our website. And of course, I have a field here to capture SEO keywords. Now, of course, in in real production, you're going to have folks go through this during the content creation process, and K4 throughout the process can make sure that your users get prompted to fill in these fields at the appropriate times. Again, during demonstrations, we simplify and streamline that just a little bit. So we'll go ahead and click OK, and K4 will automatically send this file forward in its workflow. In this case, it's going to send it to the K4 XML exporter, which is going to extract that content into a K4 intermediate schema, which then allows us to transform that content and ultimately turn it into the format we need for our final destination. And you'll see here, if I refresh my website, we can see here that story that we were looking at. We can see that kicker that I wrote at the top. We can see the lead image that was tagged with the metadata here, as well as the introductory text. And if I click on that, I can see the other images for my story. I can see the pull quote as well. If I scroll down, I can see the sidebar that was inside our story. So the presentation of this, the design and the look of what you see here, of course, is driven by the web CMS and the templates that you set up for content within the web CMS. And if I go to the edit node here within my web CMS, you can see that, that all of the different fields have been filled out. And this was done through the transformation process of the XML exporter and then the import process into my web CMS. And I can see all of that content. Now, you might think at this point in our workflow that we're done, and if we want to make changes for our website, we go and do it here within our web CMS. But I want to show you how easy it is to make changes back in K4 and then publish an update to that. But before I do, I'm going to go, I've got the iPhone simulator here that's going to my website as well. I'm just going to refresh that, and you'll see here that I do not see that story. And you remember in the metadata, I unchecked publishing to the iPhone version of my site. So we'll come back to that in a moment. I'll just minimize these two, go back over to InCopy, and let's go ahead and let's make an update to this story. So go ahead and open that up again. I might, for instance, change my headline or make another change or add additional content. And when I'm done, I can go and send an update to the server. I'm going to not do that just yet because I actually want to go and edit a piece of metadata as well. So we'll go back to the query palette. I'm going to use my Manage Tasks feature, and I'm going to tell K4 that, you know what, now I want to publish to the iPhone version of my website. Click OK. And then I can trigger an automation to publish that to the web CMS again. The same XML export routine that you saw me use before will get triggered another time. And once it's done that, it will then send an update to our website. And so now, if we go over to Safari, I'm just going to refresh this page here. And you can see here the headline has changed. Now, if I go and pull up my iPhone edition as well, we'll go ahead and refresh again. And you can see here that story is now published to the iPhone version of our website. So you can not only publish content, but you can update it in K4 and republish it with breaking news or with updates to your story. And that ultimately means that your editors and your writers can author all of their content, whether it's going to print or web, within K4. Now, you might be thinking, well, what happens if I'm creating content that's going to the web before it's going to print? You showed me a story that was inside an InDesign layout. So let's go ahead and let's quickly create a new story here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new document, and K4 is going to prompt me to use article templates. And this is a part of K4 that allows you to actually specify the structure of your content. What's nice about this is if I go to Story View or Galley View or InCopy or even Layout View, this is a format that an editor and a writer are very familiar with because they're used to looking at pages. And I'm going to go ahead and flow in content very quickly here. You don't want to sit here and watch me type. And what's really nice about this is that I'm going to place the same thing twice. What's really nice about this is that the editor and the writer has all of the tools that they're already familiar with from the print production process. They have paragraph and they have character styles. And the template creates structure in the background with tagging these frames, headline and body, so on and so forth. And of course, those can get changed during the content creation process. But what's nice about it is you can set up this template, and then if, for instance, the writer says, you know what, I don't need a pull quote in this story, I'm going to go ahead and delete those frames. They'll delete them, and they're no longer there. Ultimately, they can go and do all of the editing and content development that they would normally do within the same process and within the same applications that they use for their print content. But what's going to happen when they start a workflow for their story? They're going to go ahead, of course, assign the metadata to it, and then choose their workflow. And in this case, they might choose a web-first workflow, and we'll go ahead and put that into the digital channel, and K4 will know what's supposed to happen next in the workflow. We're supposed to add web metadata, and we're supposed to write copy. Well, we finished writing the copy, so it knows now in the step of the workflow, add web metadata, but now we can also edit the article. And you know what? We're going to jump forward very quickly in this workflow. I'm going to actually perform those tasks, so I'll accept those tasks, enter in the required metadata at this point, click OK. K4 will save that and reopen it for me to continue working on. And I can continue going through the editing process, the content development process, and then at a certain stage in my workflow, I'm going to get ready to publish this out to the web. So I'm going to use a process to map the InDesign and InCopy styles, things that the editors and the writers are more familiar with, to XML tags. Because, of course, no one wants to teach an editor or a writer, and no one wants to force an editor or a writer to have to think about XML tags. You want them to think about content. And so we can apply that in the background, and we can run all sorts of automations that will go and find abbreviations or company stock ticker symbols or URLs and go and tag all of those items as well. So you don't have to have someone go through that with a fine-tooth comb. You can use the automation to do that. Ultimately, we can still create our content packages. So I've got my story with my headline, body text, and sidebar. But I can also go into the K4 query palettes and find other content that's in the system. So in this case, I've got content for my Mito story. I've got 3 images here, and I'm just going to attach those images to my story. So in this case, there's no InDesign layout. This is just an InCopy article template, but I'm still able to capture that metadata. I'm still able to create the content packages as well as the videos. You'll notice here I've got a video that's saved in K4. So it's not just for images and text and layouts, it's also for interactive content. And we can take that video and attach that to the story as well. Ultimately, what I can do here now, I can go and finish my task. I don't care about overset because, of course, this is going to the web. We don't have to worry about that. I'm going to finish my tasks, and K4 knows the next step in the workflow is to publish to the CMS. It's also going to know that at this point in the workflow, I need to fill out some of these metadata fields. So I'll go ahead and fill those out. And again, if you have ways to be able to pick out SEO keywords, you have specific keywords you're looking for, these fields you can automatically populate with an automation if you wanted to. And I'm going to show you in a little bit how we can create an email blast. So I'm going to go ahead and choose how I want this content included in my email blast. And I just want to tease this. I don't want to actually promote this too heavily in my email blast. So we'll go ahead and click OK. K4 is going to remind me, yep, one more metadata field to fill out. So we'll go ahead and do that. Click OK and save that back to the system. At this point now, if I go back to Safari, go back to our web CMS, you'll see in the amount of time it took me to get to the website, that story is already published up here. I can go ahead and click on it. And when I do, I'm taken into my full story. I can see my images. I can see my story in my sidebar, as well as my video here. And so you can see here, you can manage all of that content in K4, quickly assemble your content packages, and then ultimately that'll get published out. All right. So moving along, well, how does all of this work in the background? We're not going to go into it in too much detail. I noticed there weren't a whole ton of IT folks on the call, so you probably don't want to talk about XML schemas. But very generally what we have here, I'm going to open up a few different files here, so just give me one moment. Very generally, what happened was when we triggered the XML export, K4 went and extracted all of the content and all of the information that it has about the file that I was exporting. That includes all of the metadata about the file, all the metadata about the images in the file, the video, as well as all of the metadata about the project that the file is a part of. And it brings it into a K4 intermediate schema. And this is what you would call the kitchen sink XML. This is giving me all of the possible information that K4 has and that K4 has captured, and basically populating it into the intermediate schema. And then from there we can transform that. So I have a couple of transformations that I've done here. One of them is that I've created a content package for my Drupal system, and that's the web CMS I'm using for my demonstrations. I've created a content package here with all of the text that's been tagged and structured, all of the images that are supposed to be imported. I've put it in a format that my Drupal environment knows how to import. And this may be different if you're using a different web CMS. So ultimately, the nice thing about starting with the kitchen sink is that you can transform that, and you can reach the different output formats you need, whether it's something like this for Drupal, whether it's Prism XML for syndication. You ultimately can define those transformations, and the system can take care of creating one output format or creating multiple output formats at the same time. And in this example, you can see here just another one. I created a simple XML. For those of you that are less familiar with XML, wanted to have something that's a little bit easier on the eyes here. And what you can see here is I've basically done a transformation where I have a set of object metadata, and then I go into my content, and I can see here the different text nodes, the type of text node, and that's, of course, from our tagged templates. As well as our content, which has been tagged within it. So ultimately, those transformations can go to the different destinations, different formats that you want. So if you saw our last webinar, you would have seen us also use the XML exporter to create HTML of a story for use within the digital publishing suite. But of course, once you create an HTML file, there's so many things you can do with it. And one of the things we hear very often is, I want to be able to take the top stories in my issue, and I want to be able to send an email blast out to my readers that kind of teases what's going to come. So ultimately, you have a HTML template that you use in Constant Contact or MailChimp or another service, and that template you can go in and actually drop in your content. But if you've seen anything from this demo, you know that we don't need to do any of the cutting and pasting of content. We can just use the automations to quickly do that. So I've created an automation to very easily and quickly create HTML for use within my email blasts. And you'll see here, if I show you the metadata for the story, just to remind you, this story in my email blast metadata, I'm capturing as the lead. So I've indicated for this issue of my magazine, this is the lead story, and the others are simply stories that shouldn't be mentioned in the teaser or should be mentioned with just a line item. So I can go and trigger that automation whenever you decide you want to. That can be, run on the last day of our issue or the day after the issue closes. And K4 will go and it will extract all of the information and create a content package for you of HTML, as well as any images that are referenced. And then I can go into that, and as you see here in this example, it's gone and it's created the email blast with, of course, my headline and my issue number. It's created an image here with that image that we saw from our story, that lead image. as well as a teaser for the story, and down at the bottom it's telling us what else is in this issue. And this, of course, is just an example here, but we can very easily and very quickly go and transform that and pull out that information so that you can go and then just simply drop it into Constant Contact or one of the other services, add it to your email list, and hit send and be ready to go. And if you wanted to, you could actually even have K4 as part of the XML export trigger the APIs that your email marketing service has to go and actually populate a new email template with the HTML coming out of K4. So there are a lot of options there. Well, that's been a very quick 30 minutes looking at a number of different output options. Certainly we didn't look at all of the steps in the process of how you go from start to finished. But if you have any questions that are specific to your workflow or anything that was brought up, please feel free to visit our website, www.maned.com, email myself or another member of our team, and we'd be happy to work with you.